This is Pretty Much Pop, a culture podcast today celebrating our 200th episode with a discussion of Hollywood in light of the Apple TV Seth Rogan show, The Studio. I'm Mark Lintonmeyer, and it took a lot of studio money to get me to compromise my original vision for this podcast of having none of the hosts speak the same language.
I'm Al Baker, and my initial pitch for this podcast was to be a podcast full of podcasters talking about making a podcast, but for some reason this topic won out.
I'm Sarahlyn Breck, and I'm ready for my close-up, Mr. Lintonmeyer.
Al, you took my idea. Lawrence Ware is a podcaster who enjoys talking about podcasts that specializes in the movies about TV shows that dig into Hollywood movies.
And a special returning guest.
Hi, everybody. I'm Erica Spires, and this was recorded in one continuous take.
Oh, that's a good one.
Nice.
That's a good one. Christopher Nolan would be proud.
You're not a returning guest, you're a returning host.
Returning host.
A ringer.
It's good to see you guys. It's like just jumping right back into the deep end.
How's the years?
Good. How have the years been?
Hey, are you still
What the heck kind of question is that, Mark?
Yeah, it's been a minute. I'm kind of doing a lot of the same thing. I have a regular day job, so that way I don't have to audition for everything that maybe I don't want to, because as I've gotten older, I've gotten a little pickier about the rooms I want to be in. But still auditioning, still working. Just got back from 4 months at like 4 different gigs and having a great time. Living in New York. Husband's good. Cat's good.
There's the update, people.
Things are good.
Wonderful.
And Brian was invited on here so we could have all the hosts, but he's not in a PMP place right now.
Oh, I understand that. We'll miss Brian.
I know that part of this was a lot of what we did together was during the pandemic.
Yeah, it was. I know looking back, I was like, there's no way I would have that capacity now. Oh, that was what an incredible thing to have during especially the pandemic and also post-pandemic. But like I was able to consume and talk about so many things that were just interesting, fun topics and to chat with y'all with different perspectives, have really great guests on. And I had wonderful experiences. And I had my own podcast for a while. I only did 6 episodes with my mom and my dad called Okay Boomer. And that was really fun because I got to know them a little bit better and they got to tell their life stories. I'm so glad that I did it. And I'm glad that you have people who are here now who can commit the time that I would no longer be able to, unfortunately.
Well, it was weekly. We were recording weekly at that point.
Weekly.
Wow.
Holy crap. That's a lot. That is a lot.
We were committed.
So this is a throwback topic in that this is not a watch a bunch of films topic. You know, the studio is a thing to hang things on, but I don't know how many people have watched that. Certainly not going to be necessary. I don't think we're going to spoil significant portions of that. It's not about that. It's about what that connotes in us, that picture of Hollywood deal making and what we are consuming being controlled by overlords who maybe don't have our best interests at heart and have to do things with giant financial scale. And so everything has to be as dumb as possible and just sort of reflecting on that general state of affairs and whether we care. That was the idea. Who wants to start?
I mean, I don't know if I want to start. I will say that in preparing for this, I watched like 2 episodes of The Studio. Kind of didn't like it. And so what I did is I took a left turn and I watched a buttload of movies about Hollywood. Like I'm talking, I watched Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I watched Sunset Boulevard. I watched Tropic Thunder. I watched Mulholland Drive. I watched The Aviator. I watched LA Confidential. I watched the singing parts of Singing in the Rain. Like I just watched a whole bunch of, because the actual talking parts are not very interesting, but the singing parts and dancing parts are great in that movie. But nevertheless, like I just watched a whole bunch of things about Hollywood to kind of get me in the mood, to get me where I needed to be, because the show was good, but I kind of wasn't that interested. There's also a show that came on Paramount Plus that was about the making of The Godfather that I remember watching maybe a year ago or so. I think it was called The Offer or something. I'm not sure what the name of that show was. But that kind of was a little bit more of my speed, but maybe it's just because I love The Godfather. But like I watch movies about movies. It allows me to bring my official film critic hat to the conversation. And so I'm not down with the dulges of you guys talking about TV shows. I'm doing movies. And so that's what I brought to the conversation.
One thing I really loved about The Studio is that it feels like a love letter, not just to Hollywood as an industry, but to filmmaking. So
It is. Yeah.
I really enjoyed that aspect, that it felt extremely cinematic to me, even though it is definitely a TV show. So I'm curious if after indulging in those other movies, if there was any part of you that wanted to come back to it, or if there's a reason that you felt like you couldn't.
No, I do want to come back to it because I said I did enjoy the show, and I don't want to hijack this as Mark and Al often do. So I'm going to make sure I get Sarah here in a second. I'm like taking shots at y'all. I'm sorry. It's been a day. I'm having a great day today. Anyway. But yeah, honestly, the show was good. It just didn't rise to the level of like a Barton Fink, for example. It just didn't rise to that level, or The Player or something like that. But those are hard movies to rise to the level because those are great filmmakers. But nevertheless, it just didn't rise to that level. But it's nice and enjoyable. And it's something I'll probably put on in the background to kind of watch it. But it just didn't really go as deep as I would have liked for it to go. It was a little bit on the B and C plots. It was a little bit too hijinky for me, whereas I want a little bit more depth. But Sarah, what did you do to get ready for the podcast?
Well, I watched The Studio and I also watched Hacks beforehand. So I decided to go back and take a look at some films. I watched The Player once again and was blown away. I still love that. It's so great.
It is really
so
good.
I was so happy to watch that again. We also watched The Mistress. It's also about Hollywood, and it came out the same year as The Player, which is probably why not a lot of people saw it. But Josh recommended it, and it has that cast is so stacked. It's got Martin Landau, Robert De Niro, Danny Aiello. It stars Robert Wall. It's got Eli Wallach. It's got like all of these people in it.
Ooh.
And it wasn't as good. However, it was still, once again, I think all of these movies and television shows are, in a way, just like you said, Erica, they're love letters to creativity, to Hollywood, to filmmaking. I also watched Hollywood Shuffle, which was wonderful.
Oh, one of my favorite movies of all time. Love Hollywood Shuffle.
So
oh my
much
gosh.
fun.
I can go so deep into that movie. Love that movie.
No, that was so much fun. We watched that one with friends and we all adored it. Big Picture, once again, that one was fun. So, and I watched a couple episodes of Entourage just because I never was too interested in that when it came out, but you know, that's its own thing. I actually really, really like The Studio, and I'm so glad that we were able to talk about this Hollywood navel gazing today because I thought every single one of those episodes, some of them were better than others, but you could really see that they were not necessarily stealing, but they were paying homage to, you know, some of the techniques and the things that we've seen before in movies about Hollywood.
Just as far as The Studio goes, I watched it a couple of weeks ago and it was exactly what I needed at the time. I was feeling like grumpy one day and it was like, well, Seth Rogen is probably going to make me feel better. So I watched it even before I knew we were going to talk about it for the podcast. And it was good. I had a good time with it, although it's kind of telling that a few weeks later, I couldn't really remember much about the show and I had to go and look up plot details in time for this. So I don't think it's necessarily masterful comedy TV, but it is really distinctive in the kind of subgenre of TV shows or movies about making movies. For one thing, I think having watched The Studio is now the first time that I've ever really been clear on what exactly a producer's job is. Because even though it's kind of a running joke in a lot of navel-gazy Hollywood stuff that anyone can be a producer and it's kind of a nebulous job with no real responsibilities, but also a lot of responsibility. In The Studio, we actually see, I mean, it's a heightened satirized version, but you do see the kind of way that producers can be credited with making movies happen. And it is obviously a love letter to Hollywood, but I think what I really liked about the show was it really kind of dramatized. There's a phrase that I've heard people who work in movies use a lot, which is that any time a movie gets made, it's a miracle, which is something that people are always very keen to say if someone is inviting them to talk smack about some recent movie that maybe isn't very good. It is important to remember that movies are intensely complicated, unwieldy, weird projects. And they can only ever come together like by the skin of their teeth and at the last moment and on a wing and a prayer. So anytime any movie is made, it is a miracle. And this show kind of really reminds us of that. And just how much of what, because we sit here in our podcast ivory tower, we say, oh, this movie was great, this movie wasn't very good. And then everyone like sweating it out down there in Hollywood must be clearly insanely frustrated because the difference between a good movie and a bad movie in execution clearly is down to luck more than almost anything. And I guess that's the big thing that this show's trying to remind us of.
I've been a big fan recently of Amy Poehler's podcast, Good Hang, and she just had Dakota Johnson on there. And that's one of the things they talked about is because, you know, Dakota got this Razzie for Madam Web and she went, right? And she was talking about she's like, Amy, you know as well as I do, you don't know. When you're signing on to a project, you feel like it's going to be great, or else you wouldn't sign on to it. And then something changes. Maybe an actor changes or a writer changes or whatever changes, right? The budget changes. And then something that was supposed to be really great turns into something else. But you've already signed on the dotted line. So you're stuck to that thing and whatever that thing becomes. So it was really fun hearing her talking about that and seeing this actually happen in real time, right? When you have the episode with Olivia Wilde, which I also love that they brought her in and she kind of got to make fun of herself for the stuff that's been out there about her the last couple of years. And is she a good director or is she just a hack and she's kind of a bitch, you know? And she just played into that, I think, so well. And seeing that that was one of those projects that was supposed to go a certain way that went a completely different direction. About a year or two ago, I read this book by William Goldman called Which Lie Did I Tell? And I found it really inspirational because he was talking about how difficult it is to make a film and how difficult it is to be a writer of a very, he had just won an Academy Award and then couldn't get arrested after that for years. And he was just sitting in his apartment being like, what do I do? And of course, after that, he continued to write and have very successful films. But during that period, I mean, even if you think about any other person not working for 2 years, and not just not working for 2 years plus, but also having won an Oscar and not working after that. Going from this high to this extremely low just shows that unpredictability. And he goes into different stories about why certain films did or didn't get made, or if they did get made, didn't happen in the time frame they were supposed to because an actor couldn't do it or something.
It feels like, lightning striking, when something goes right. One conversation that they were having during the player that I feel like we're not having as much today is the idea of how stars can either make or break a film. So I thought it was so funny that in the player, they kept bringing up Bruce Willis and Julia Roberts, as who were the rightest, the people who were most right for these films and would make a film be what they wanted it to be. And you just don't have that conversation anymore. I hear a lot more. I heard that same interview with Dakota Johnson about how collaborative. And filmmaking has always been a very collaborative endeavor, which is why it's so hard to get it. Like you said, Al, it's a miracle that anything ever gets made. But it is such a collaborative effort, whereas you can have a great performance with terrible writing or terrible production or, there's just not enough time or terrible editing. The list goes on. You can have, one or two things that are actually really great, but if nothing else happens, it's just not going to work. And it just feels like today it's so precarious. There's nothing that can really predict how a movie or a television show is going to be received, or if it's going to do well at the box office. It's really hard to tell. And they keep saying, if it's a superhero movie, then that's kind of a guaranteed win. Well, no, we've seen that it's not actually a guaranteed. If it's a remake of something, nope, Disney has tried this over and over again. And sure, sometimes it hits and sometimes it misses. There's just no guarantees in this business.
I feel like the show, The Studio, was the first piece of media that I can recall that showed studio executives in a positive light as just being people who are trying to do a thing and they love movies. And for all these reasons that we've been saying, it's really hard to get all the ducks lined up to make these things happen. I watched the first half I was watching it today, of The Big Picture, the Christopher Guest, who's the star, the Kevin Bacon movie from 1989. Mm-hmm. The studio executive in that is sort of what I picture, where it's somebody who is not an artist, who's throwing in these very disruptive ideas just to kind of flex their power because they can, as opposed to, somebody who has to be the one to, we talk a lot on this podcast about this auteur needed an editor, needed someone to tell him no. Well, the studio people are among those people, are the only ones with the real power to enforce that kind of thing. And so, yeah, how do we feel about It seems like for every example of something that like, well, this was a compromise and this film had 3 different directors and it went through so many problems, you can see why it's a patchwork piece of crap. Do we even hear about the success stories of like somebody was about to make a terrible mistake, but because they had good studio executives forcing them to make it something that people would actually enjoy, then that was good?
I don't know if that we know. I mean,
Yeah,
I guess we'd have to seek out those stories, but we do know that people thank the producers. But now we know that people thank the producers because they have to thank the producers.
I mean, it's a really obvious trope, right? That the studio executives are the money grubbing, like wannabe creative bad guys, because it's the people who they impose upon who write the stories and the characters. So that's become the trope. But there are a few examples I can think of. So Seinfeld is the thing that comes to mind. And it's very clear when they're pitching the TV show to the executives, it's very clear in that dynamic that like the executives know what they're doing and George Costanza and Jerry Seinfeld don't really know what they're doing. And like nothing's going to happen without these guys. And also I just happened to be reading a Reddit thread because we're doing Superman shortly about one of the Justice League cartoons. And this particular one, Justice League Unlimited, was wildly successful because it took a couple of creative risks. And there's a story on the thread that this is all the decision of like corporate because they wanted to go in a completely different direction. The writers didn't. And it turns out that, yeah, corporate is sometimes right and probably a lot more than we realize.
We're going to stop for some sponsor messages. Movie lovers, I've got a fantastic podcast recommendation. All the Right Movies is a film podcast that, in bringing fresh, insightful perspectives to both classic and contemporary cinema, manages to tell the story of Hollywood one movie at a time. Each episode is a deep dive into a classic film where hosts John, Luke, Westy, and Matt tell the creative story of how the film was made while also analyzing the craft and artistry that makes it significant, all while having a laugh or two along the way. What makes All the Right Movies special, beyond their ability to make every film feel worth discussing, is their incredible community of passionate film fans. They've grown to 35,000 monthly downloads and have over 1.5 million social media followers because they treat their audience like fellow movie enthusiasts with intelligence. With over 1,000 Patreon supporters, they built the kind of engaged community that every podcaster dreams of. Plus, they have a book coming out in 2026, so you know they're serious about their craft. Find All the Right Movies wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts and join their community of movie lovers who never run out of great films to discuss.
When I think about good producers, I'm trying to decide how much I want to say here. So I do a lot of writing about film and whatnot. And through my writing for the New York Times or whatever, I've been able to make friends with people like Ryan Coogler, Spike Lee, a lot of black filmmakers. And oftentimes the stories that I hear from them is that, and especially trying to make the films that they want to make, it really depends upon whether or not that producer is willing to listen to people who have different perspectives than them, right? So Jason Blum, for example, I've heard from many different people, is really good at like ushering people into where he thinks they can be successful, but also not having a heavy hand and saying it must be done like this, right? So when Get Out was made, he was able to support what that filmmaker was doing without necessarily having too heavy of a hand. Another person that I hear oftentimes, or I have heard oftentimes, who is pretty good at like listening is Kevin Feige. I've heard that he's pretty good at like ushering and trying to wrangle these disparate kind of ideas together. But he also is able to kind of let a black filmmaker, for example, kind of do what he wants to do. Like if you look at Black Panther, that first film, it is a weird film. Like it is a hardcore black nationalist kind of story. And yet it's kind of fitting into that Marvel mold. So there are producers. Now I've also heard of people, and I'm not going to say their names because I don't want to be blackballed, but I've also heard of many producers who are very much like, it must be done this way. It must be done the way that I see that it needs to be done. And when they are oftentimes that way, what happens is that they've had some success in the past and they try to replicate that success, the model that they used to have that earlier success. And that's just not the way that film works. Like you have to be malleable. You have to be able to kind of change direction and listen to the filmmakers and listen to the actors. Now, I will say that many filmmakers will say that the right actor will absolutely get a film through, right? If you can sign that right actor to whatever idea that you have, right? that's the reason why you see some filmmakers making multiple films with certain kind of actors, because I know that this actor can do what I need this person to do. And also they have enough cachet, enough fame to kind of push that thing down to the finish line. And so, Sarah, I do hear that a little bit. It depends what circle you're kind of running in. But a lot of people are all about, if I can get the right actor, then we can get this film off the ground. So it does happen. That conversation does happen quite a bit.
Mm-hmm. No, that's true. I've heard that as well. I mean, you can get funding and stuff if you've got the right talent, kind of.
And funding is half the battle. It really is. It's half the battle is funding.
Absolutely. But one conversation that I liked that the studio had about filmmaking was, it seems like everyone who is involved in the process is there because they genuinely love movies. Even if they're not considered creative talent, they're there because they love it. And even if they may be misguided, or it may be a power play, or who knows, they're a misunderstanding. It seems like from the studio's point of view, it's usually a misunderstanding of what their role in the project actually is. And I love that conversation that Seth Rogan has with Ted Sarandos about how he sees himself as a bean counter, and he's fine with it. I liked that. And he is known for being a huge comedy nerd. He is a huge fan of film and television, but he knows exactly what he brings to the table. And that was the lesson, I think, or at least one lesson that Seth Rogen's character needed to hear.
There is that running theme through the studio that what Seth Rogen, and it generalizes to any kind of non-creative participant in the movie industry, that all they desperately want is to be thanked by a movie star from an award stage. And that is clearly like the height of ambition for any Hollywood producer. And precisely because nobody does know what they do. It's also a running joke that like Seth Rogen's mum doesn't have a clue like what he does, doesn't really believe that he's actually a big player in Hollywood. And just to be able to communicate that you do matter, actually, you have made a contribution to movies, and it must be the case because somebody famous said my name on stage.
I will say it was a show for me that grew in hilarity. It was really hard to watch the first episode, and even the second episode I had a hard time. And I'm not in the film industry necessarily, but being adjacent to it in the theatrical industry, it's close enough that there's some it's for anybody. It can be cringy. It can be especially cringy watching it as an actor and being like, oh, I'm seeing people reflected to me who I know, or maybe it's me. Oh God, is it me? And it's really hard to watch that sometimes. And I think you're right, Sarahlyn, when you talked about they mean well and they're misunderstood. That was something that kept me wanting to come back because I liked the characters. And also at a certain point, I just knew they were probably going to make the worst possible decision and everything was going to go wrong. So once that was predicted, after a few episodes, I was like, okay, what crazy thing is going to happen? Because then it feels like a Warner Brothers cartoon. Disaster's going to happen. Just how is it exactly going to come about? That became more and more fun to watch rather than cringy.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I wonder if the change in take between the traditional portrayals and what we see here has to do with the changing industry, that it's just harder. We hear a lot about with TV that, okay, you have your 3 channels and they kind of know that they have a built-in audience and you get these established players. And now it's so disparate with Netflix and these non-studio, Hollywood itself might be falling apart, that, there's content coming from other places. You don't have this. So it's more like the, record industry was a similar thing. It used to be a few major labels had control of quite a bit of stuff. Now things have changed such that only a very small amount of things actually gets to, in terms of music, gets to be pop culture, but there's a much wider swath that gets to get made. And so I think there's probably something similar going around in the movie industry that if we really want to compete, if we really want to be this tentpole thing, then we're going to be more conservative than anybody in the history of Hollywood has ever been. But at the same time, there's so many films coming out that it's hard to picture them getting through anything like the process that we're seeing here.
In the changing industry with streaming versus if something is going straight to video versus if it's in the theaters also is a huge, huge thing. And I knew that and I'd heard about it, but I didn't really understand. Now, a friend of mine, Whitney, who we'd had on the podcast years ago, she's a costume designer. she had something like this happen where she was supposed to be in a film that was going to the theaters, and then something happened, studio got bought out by another studio, and then all of a sudden it was straight to streaming. Budgetary changes happened, and it ended up not being the project that it once was going to be. But this is another example, because I wanted to give this to you. It's so funny. This is a friend of mine who is an actor who does like typically small roles in films that sometimes come to the city where he lives. So I won't reveal anything about what specific movies these were, but he writes, "You'll appreciate this. I did one day on a movie that made it to theaters, got my first residual check for $600. One day. Okay. First residual check, $600.
Good money.
5 weeks on a movie that went straight to video. First residual check, $8.08. 5 weeks, $8.08 versus 1 day, $600.
Yeah.
Thank God for scale.
That's significant. And that's Matthew McConaughey. We don't want to know. We don't want to let people know who that is. But that's who wrote you that note.
Absolutely, Matthew McConaughey.
Yeah, that's the guy who wrote that. I mean, you might as well just put all the cards on the table. But that is a significant difference, and that's the reason why there's such this huge push by many filmmakers to say, no, we want our movies to go to the theater. We want it because there is this magic of movies, sitting down in a dark room, having this communal experience part of it. But there's also a very real bottom line part of it as well. And there are real financial concerns and real financial ramifications for a movie taking off the fast track to being in the movie theater and being placed on streaming instead. So no, I'm not surprised by that whatsoever. Sorry, Matthew.
You hear that, it's show business, right? I think in all creative industries, I'm obviously more involved in the book publishing, and that is also a business. And I see all of these connections between all of the creative industries, whereas we don't see too much about the book publishing industry put on film or on television, maybe a little bit here and there. We don't see much about things that go on, about plays, about the theater. We don't see that much about that, but we do see a fair amount about music, and we see a lot about the film and television industry. Why are we fed so much of this about the behind the scenes stuff about show business and how hard it is, whereas we don't see it in other industries?
Oh, I've been watching that Justin Baldoni and Blake Lively drama since last fall.
That has engrossed me. That is a wild ride. I might need to talk to you offline about that, Erica, because
oh yeah,
there is some crazy stuff going on with that. Anyway, I think that part of it is that the filmmakers probably don't know the publishing side of things. The filmmakers, they know show business. That's in their wheelhouse.
They write what they know.
Yeah, and so I think that they're making films.
There are a lot more novels where the protagonist is a novelist than where the protagonist is a filmmaker.
That's a good point.
Probably there are more novels where the protagonist is a novelist than anything else.
Fair.
So, yeah, it's not surprising that filmmakers make more movies about making movies. And I had another point, but I can't remember what it was. Sorry, Lawrence, I interrupted.
No. It was a great point. What you made was a great point, and the point that you didn't make was a great point too. So thank you for bringing that to the discussion.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Well, it's also a little more photogenic to make a film about people making films. Ed Wood is a delightful film showing all that goofy stuff that they were doing, or Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, or the what was the one recently that they were making I, Claudius, that had I will stop saying things that I can't remember.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Welcome to my world.
I remember the other point that I was going to make, which is why I think Sarahlyn picked up on something really interesting, which is that besides movie making, there are loads of movies about music. And there's that famous aphorism that every musician wants to be an actor and every actor wants to be a musician.
There is.
It could just be that.
And also, as a writer, Sarah, you and you're much more of a writer than I am. I just dabble here and there. You're an actual legitimate writer.
You're a legitimate writer, Lawrence.
I'm not a legitimate.
Sorry to tell you.
I'm not legitimate. You're much better than I am. But it's not very cinematic writing. You sit down and you wrestle with the words and you battle and you
think this isn't...
It's not cinematic. It
dramatic?
It really is not. There's that... Oh, my goodness. I'm in Mark territory. There's a movie starring Michael Douglas. It's about a writer in Chicago.
He's a professor, too.
It's in Chicago. It has Tobey Maguire in it.
Is it Wonder Boys?
Wonder Boys. That's it.
Yes, based on a novel, of course.
Yeah, I forgot what the guy's name was. But that is one of the best films about writing, I think. And they find a way to make that cinematic. But most movies about writing is not very fun. It's just not. Like, how do you film that?
It has to be evil. That Stephen King has written a dozen different things about a writer who is their demon, that they're something about the writing process.
The Shining is an example of that. Misery is like that. Yes. But it's very hard to make a film about a writer who has this breakthrough. Like, how do you film that? I don't know how to film that. Now,
Romancing the Stone.
I don't know.
Stranger Than Fiction, I know it's not the same, but I think it does a really great job of it.
But that's Charlie Kaufman, man. Charlie Kaufman is really good at figuring out how to put that kind of stuff on screen.
He's showing us the story that's supposed to be written, right? Rather than the writer writing the story. And I think that's an interesting way in, and having it narrated instead.
And those are more about creative process than they are about, how hard the industry is.
Yeah. How
you're compromising your values sometimes to stay in it.
I'm trying to think, are there movies about those stories for writers? I'm sure there are. Can't think of them right now.
About compromising?
Yeah.
What's that movie? Sarah, you can probably help me out with this.
As Good as It Gets.
Oh, the one at American Fiction.
I was wondering what that was. American Fiction is about that. American Fiction is like that.
Thank you.
I like this Erica. Erica's all right. I like her.
She'll do.
So the movie I was trying to remember was Hail Caesar, which is one of a number of things.
That's another one.
It seems like there's just as many films depicting old Hollywood as there are depicting current Hollywood. Like in the studio, we get something reflecting some of the present, the way that racism is worried about today. I thought that was the best episode of trying to cast the Kool-Aid movie.
Oh yeah.
And the things that they go around in circles about. Is it that they romanticize the past, the studio system, when, from all accounts, it seems like it was much worse in a lot of ways, just in terms of that there's a lot less freedom to do things. Again, it's like the three networks. So I don't have a good enough knowledge of old film to say whether most old film was much more homogeneous as compared to, new film which we also blast for, it's all based on past IP. It has to have dumb action scenes, since Jaws. Mm-hmm. Then anything that's going to fit that narrow slice of is saleable to China, it has to be not too much dialogue, least common denominator. So yeah, what is the deal? What's the deal with old Hollywood? Should we... Is it, do you guys find it fascinating?
So much of this hasn't changed. I was still kind of blown away at how relevant Hollywood Shuffle still was. The stuff that they were talking about in that movie, especially the way actors of color are treated in the industry, is still relevant now.
Still true.
So I think that a lot of it, they keep coming back to it, and they also do romanticize old Hollywood, but there's a connection there between now and the past that has never gone away.
I think it also does come back again to writing what you know. As you very eloquently said, Mark, you don't know a lot of interesting stories about old Hollywood, but who does know a lot of good, interesting stories about old Hollywood? Hollywood screenwriters and Hollywood filmmakers. Like, what's that brilliant Andrew Garfield movie about the guy making the musical?
Tick, Tick, Boom.
Tick, tick, boom.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So glad that I get an excuse to talk about this. There's a story on BoJack Horseman, which, by the way, is an incredible TV show, where Todd, who's like the comedy sidekick character, writes a musical which is about people going off to live on another planet. And anyway, I watched that and I thought, this is a very funny like side plot that they've got this character doing. But then it turns out that's the plot of Tick, Tick, Boom. So clearly this is just a story that several people had heard happened to this guy in Hollywood, and then it made its way onto one show, and then it was adapted into a whole other show. If you hang around Hollywood, you hear a lot of gossip, and some of that's going to make its way into a script.
And there's some good gossip, I'm sure. I mean, I love good gossip. I really do. And I used to feel kind of bad for it. My husband is very funny. He's like, oh, give me all the hot goss. He's like, I'm here for it, right? I don't seek it out necessarily, but when I get it, it feels good, especially if it's like a firsthand experience. Like when I hear about a friend whose friend works in Hollywood and had a bad interaction with an actor, oh, like, tell me more. I want to know exactly what that person did.
Yeah, me too.
Oh,
But I pull up a chair. I'm like, okay, come sit next to me. I want to hear that.
We're not immune for that. Just that we had, in our Bill Cosby, the sexual predators sort of episode, we had on a guest partly because she had a firsthand experience with Bill Cosby hitting on her. And so,
my gosh.
I don't know if
you were on there, Lawrence. You were on that show.
I was not on there. Was I
you
on
were
there?
on that show.
I participated in this craziness?
Yes.
This must have been really early in my podcasting days. I don't know if I'd have signed off on that one, but go ahead.
I wonder if part of what normies' obsession with Hollywood is that gossipy aspect of the storytelling about the inside Hollywood stuff. I watched a couple episodes of Entourage, and I have to say that show is probably not for me. It felt very broy.
It's not for you. It is not for you. Sarah, I know you.
It's not for me.
Yeah, it's not.
But it was still fun and interesting to see how short their tempers were, how they treated each other. And I don't know, I think for some people, it could confirm some suspicions that they might have about some of these people. And it's, it can be kind of schadenfreude in a way. If these people who are driving fancy cars, living in mansions, living the life, and then you learn that they're not happy, that can feel good to some people. I'm not saying to me,
right,
but maybe to some people.
I'm a real wuss. I just want to hear that everyone is lovely and that everyone has a wonderful time.
You're so
I'm
British.
behind the audience for the Hollywood for the promotional junket speeches when everyone says, working on this movie is just like being in one big family, and we're all such good friends now. Because it's always true. That's why they say it all the time. Because it's always true.
It's not true.
It's always true.
It's not true. I promise you, it's not true. Listen to the Blake Lively and Baldoni drama. That's not true.
Don't even get me started on the F word, like using the F word at work. Family. Ugh, that's a great way to manipulate people.
I thought you were going to say another F word.
Well, that's why I said the F word. It's provocative, right?
Financing.
But I think like another thing that the studio does, and also a lot of these other films, Mark, going back to your question about old Hollywood, what's the deal with old Hollywood? What's the deal with these stories? It's not just a story about Hollywood from the outside. It is actually using actors as themselves, as versions of themselves, right? So Seth Rogen does play a character that's not himself, but we have Ron Howard in an episode. We have Martin Scorsese. A lot of people like seeing who these people are, these people that they've seen on film, and seeing who they are in real life. And of course, this isn't who they are, but maybe a heightened version or a satirical version of themselves. Mm-hmm. And that's fun to see, I think, to see them poke fun at themselves and what they might allow the writers to write about them and how much they want to play into that.
Mm-hmm.
I had thought about Extras, the Ricky Gervais show.
Oh, yeah.
Made such excellent use of that with Daniel Radcliffe right as he was attaining maturity,
right,
depicting him as this like super horny teen, and many, many other examples of.
Yeah, Patrick Stewart is my favorite one of those. 'Cause he was so good at getting them to play the versions of themselves that were kind of uncomfortably close to what we think their major kind of character deficit might be. Because like Ian McKellen again is all like pretentious and ultimately full of hot air. Yeah, Ricky Gervais peaked then.
One thing I want to say out loud is one of the things I absolutely loved about the studio, and it's not something I always notice, but I definitely did for this, was the costume design. And that was done by Cameron Lennox. Like every time I was looking at Seth Rogen, I was like, my gosh, I love his outfits. I love that he looks like a producer from a different time in Hollywood, but also very current. Mm-hmm. Production design overall was stunning, I thought.
I thought so too. Yeah, just where the studio was, those exterior shots I thought were really cool. Mm-hmm. Catherine O'Hara's home, that was fantastic. And that looked exactly like how I thought a producer's home would look. I thought, they got that right. That's what I imagined, pretty much, But what we haven't talked about is comedy. And I wanted to kind of circle back to Hacks a little bit, because that's a show that started as really a conversation about comedy. And then it ended up really being about what it's like to be a nighttime talk show, especially today. And I wondered have you guys all watched Larry Sanders?
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
guessing you guys.
A few episodes.
Many years ago, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Not all of it.
I love that show. I wish I could have gone back and watched a couple of episodes, but I watched the entire thing, and I think I even had it on like DVD or something. I loved it so much. But I was also kind of struck at how the conversation has changed for sure in that space, but there are so many things that have remained the same, that same, attention to ratings and that nightly grind and how hard that job actually is. Did you guys watch Hacks as well?
I saw the first season.
Yeah, I saw the first season as well.
I'm up to date.
I saw half the first season.
You saw half the first season. Okay. All right. Well, no, I like the conversation that they had, especially about an ambitious woman who is not 30 or even 25, who is still grinding away and doing her thing, and how she has to pivot. And it's a constant pivot. She has done this job for most of her adult life, it seems like. And all of the ways that she has had to make herself relevant in order to keep her job, I think is just so interesting. And I think that's not just for female comedians of a certain age. I think that's for anybody who's going to want to stay relevant in this industry. But she does such a great job in that part. And I like this last season. I like the focus on the late night conversation, even though we've seen that conversation before.
Yeah. So this is kind of comparable to in our medical dramas thing. Like, well, our shows about or presentations of some other related thing. Like, it's not about the hospital. It's about people at a med spa getting liposuctions and things like that. I really like all the, if it's about community theater, if it's Waiting for Guffman. Yeah. The Last Showgirl is one that I saw recently about this. Basically, this is, I don't know if this is Pamela Anderson's sort of big acting comeback, was she ever there? Like, she gives a really good performance depicting this Las Vegas show with their bare breasts kicking their legs that's been going for 40 years or some ridiculous amount of time, finally getting canceled. And there's almost nothing happens in the whole film, but it's just a glimpse into like, oh yeah, this is a thing. People do this thing that I always find that interesting. So especially the first couple times it was done, like actually seeing, this is what studio executives are like. This is how films get made. Like, that's always just interesting in itself. It's just when film after film or whatever is made in the same subject, then they have to do something interesting with it. It has to be a really good comedy. It has to be, some, I don't feel like there is an overstuffed glut of films about, because even films about making movies, there's so many different eras, there's so many different kinds, and Ed Wood is such a different film than Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, or like, I'm not really worried about, please stop making, it's so navel-gazy, because I still feel like I'm learning about a new thing. And, I hadn't heard, Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg's take on this before, so this still seemed like something fundamentally new for me.
Yeah, the weird thing about movies about making movies as opposed to almost any other kind of hackneyed trope is that there's a lot of really good movies about making movies. I don't know why that is. Maybe it's because they are kind of inward looking and navel gazing and hard to market. So in order to get one made, there's maybe got to be a really special reason why Hollywood is going to go to the trouble of making a navel gazing movie about itself. But they get away with it a lot. Are there many bad movies about making movies? Lawrence, do you know any?
I mean, I'm going to say a controversial
do it.
You're a bad influence. The thing is that I think that Hollywood has an over obsession about giving Oscars to movies that are about movies.
Yes.
I'm really tired of that. But there is a movie that I actually do think is quite bad, but it actually won an Oscar. And it's called The Artist. It came out in 2012.
I remember that. Yeah.
It's a black and white, relatively silent film. And it's all about movie making. And I have no idea to this day why that movie won an Oscar. I detest it every single time I try to sit down and watch it. So there are bad movies about making movies, but it is what Hollywood knows. They know that's like how to tell a story about that subject matter. Sometimes they get it right. I think Babylon, that came out, 2 years ago or so, I think that's a wonderful example of that. But then there are movies like Blonde that I think are not very good at kind of telling that kind of story, right? So it's hit or miss. It's oftentimes more hits than miss. But the movies that we oftentimes know about are going to be the hits, the ones that are really, really good. Outside of the artists, those are the ones that we're really going to know, the ones that are really, really good. But there are a plethora of movies that are about Hollywood that are not very good, and it's not even worth going down the list.
We had Maxine. That sort of, there you could have different movies that take place in a Hollywood.
Horror. That's
right.
Horror,
I'm not saying
Jason.
it's bad, but it's not high art. It is not trying to be high art.
Oh,
it
it's
is
not even remotely
films
trying to be high art.
about
That movie isn't. Yeah.
Using movie making as the setting for any number of stories, right? You could just have romances, or actually I'm trying to think if there is a rom-com that's like the director and the actor. It seems like in the days of Harvey Weinstein, you could not.
So there is one that I had totally forgotten about until right now. I'm like looking at some examples. It's not necessarily a rom-com, but it is a comedy, Bowfinger.
We talked about Bowfinger,
Love that movie.
Heather Graham and Steve Martin.
That's not a great
have a
movie.
thing.
That's not a great movie.
But it's funny.
You don't like that, but I love that movie. You don't.
It is not funny. That movie is so terrible.
When's the last time you saw it?
We had a Steve Martin episode about 6 months ago. So
A couple months ago, I watched Bowfinger.
Okay, well, then I can't use that. I will say, like, when I first saw it, I didn't think it was funny as I thought it was a few years later. When I was like, all the things that I thought were just kind of stupid, and they're still really sometimes funny. But that was one of those that was kind of those uncomfortable, Heather Graham trying to get a leg up and Steve Martin more than ready to take advantage of it.
Yeah, that's a movie.
That's it. It is.
That movie was not great on a rewatch for me. Tropic Thunder was another one. I didn't do a rewatch of that, but when it came out, I thought it was really funny.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that one.
I really like The Man Who Knew Too Little, which is a stupid film. It's a Bill Murray film, but it's all about
funny,
like
it's
show
funny.
business, but it combines with reality. So anytime, Tropic Thunder, like we think we're doing an action movie, but we're really involved in real action. Or there's, it's an old trope of there's going to be real political assassination in the middle of the theater thing about a political assassination or something.
I do enjoy, and these are not about movies, but one of the first movies I remember watching, actually, these were around the same time, that were about the industry and the ins and outs of the industry, was Soap Dish.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, my God. I love that movie.
So funny, right? And that's a great one. And then the other one is Noises Off.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So it's a play that was turned into a movie.
Yeah, I don't know that one.
It's so funny. And I think that the reason both of those for me are so funny are because you see the actors being actors, and then you see who they are off stage and how terrible a lot of them are. Just bad behavior. And it's funny to watch people fake being somebody really noble or kind, and then you see the other side of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That was also genre specific too. Soap Dish was really looking at the soap opera industry. Tropic Thunder is looking at action movies.
Yes.
Which makes it really fun. And that gives it that angle that you kind of need.
A different context. You're totally right. And I think, the studio really does that with the executives versus it does get into the actors, but not as much. It's about the executives.
Is Barry a show about?
Yeah.
100%.
It's about acting, I guess. Barry is. And then I'm going to tell you a movie, honestly. I mean, if y'all want to get risque, we want to get X-rated here.
Oh.
Boogie Nights. I love that movie as a movie about an industry.
Well, there you go. That's exactly what I'm talking about. That's an area of the industry that you probably didn't know much about, or this is that a particular historical period even.
Loved it, and I loved just the story that it told, and all there's the actors and there's the producers, there's the directors, there's all these interrelated stories, and of course, that's a lot of that has to do with the filmmaking, but it's a really interesting take and the downfall and how he tries to become an 80s singer and he's terrible at it. It's just all these interesting kind of intricate things. I absolutely loved it. Loved that movie. We should do an episode about porn. That's what we should do is do an episode about. Okay, that was a joke.
Erica can tell you this was during our first years. Like, I kept floating this as it's such a big part of the entertainment industry. And Erica was just like, well, please don't make me watch any. Just come on. And we just chickened out and never did it. And then now that you're on the show, Lawrence, then I would never suggest it.
How about me and you? We just watch, 24 hours of porn and we come here and we just talk about it. Let's just
An Emmanuel marathon.
Yeah, really analyze it though. Like not tantalizing, just like down analytics.
I'm not watching this for titillation. I'm watching this for the artistry. I'm about to say really bad stuff. Let me stop talking.
I am more interested in
watching it for the articles.
In the behind the scenes, in the how horrible. I've seen the occasional documentary about like, I think there was one called After Porn or something. That's just like all these people talking about how fucked up it is and how they just kept them drugged 24 hours a day. And that it's basically a human trafficking organization. Like that at least was like watching a news show. That it was informative.
That sounds very depressing.
I feel like I'm being judged by Sarah and Erica right now, so I'm just going to stop talking.
Not at all. I'm just not interested.
I'm not judging.
But you go right ahead.
Right. What about, did anyone see The Disaster Artist when it came out?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
I read that book. I love that, that whole...
The story.
Oh, you read the book. The Tommy Wiseau. I remember when we lived in LA, we saw those giant billboards of his movie. That was just, it kind of lived there for years. I think it was there the entire time that we lived in LA, which was from 2000 to 2007.
Oh my.
We saw his face. Yeah, that I thought was a fascinating, and that Seth Rogen, Dave Franco, well, both of the Franco brothers are in that, were involved in telling that story about that weird slice of Hollywood life.
And how strange was it that Dave Franco was in this, but James was not? And they're still continuing that friendship, but not the other one.
Yeah.
Dave's not canceled yet.
Yeah. I think James, is a problematic figure.
James is very nearly canceled. Is he even working anymore?
I think he has come back a little bit, but Seth Rogen is not his friend anymore. That's all it is.
Yeah.
I don't know. He went to my high school.
Really?
Seth Rogen?
So did Dave.
Or the Francos.
No, the Franco brothers went to my high school.
Really? So that explains why you're the way you are, Sarah. It's wonderful.
How many years ahead or behind?
Is that right?
Was he?
So James Franco was my sister's year, and Dave actually was friends with my youngest brother.
Really? That is kind of cool, actually.
I'm older than both of them, however.
You don't look it, Sarah. You don't look it at all.
Thanks,
I'm being
Lawrence.
dead serious. Don't laugh at me. I'm being serious. This is me being earnest. I'm dead serious.
All right, good. It's good. Lighting's working.
All right. As a final topic, what else do we want out of this thing? Like, I think a season 2 could have legs. I think you could have as many seasons as you want with this. I think Apple TV Plus is a great venue to just like let people do whatever they want. And we apparently don't care if these things make money. I don't know how sustainable it all is, but if it's a little bit of your iPhone money is going to pay for this, like, okay, that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
I really like Seth Rogen in a TV show. Seth Rogen should be allowed to make more TV shows, I think is the big thing. Yeah, let's have another season or 2 out of this, but Seth Rogen is just extremely likable on screen, and he has a number of passions, and he's very good at making his passions relatable on screen of various kinds.
There was a romantic comedy show that starred him within the last 2 years on Apple as well. That was also
platonic.
Perfectly nice.
The thing that I find most impressive about Seth Rogen is that he has managed to stake out a career for himself where he can apparently just dictate that every single character that he plays smokes weed. So anytime he's on camera, he can be stoned.
Sure.
Good for him.
One thing that this show has going for it is that each of the episodes is a standalone, basically. There is the Kool-Aid film through line, but it's pretty thin. Each episode, you can kind of pop in and out at your leisure, basically, and get a gist of what's going on, which could mean that this, if they can keep up the quality of the show, it could have more than one season. It could have 2 or 3 seasons in it or more.
Hey, I mean, if Entourage lasted as long as it did with that,
that
foundation,
different. Yeah,
I watched that all the way through. I mean, I've watched it way after the fact, like within the past 5 years, I checked it out. But yeah, I thought it was a perfectly nice guilty pleasure, and I would recommend Hacks to anybody, whether you've watched the beginning of it or not. Like, it's a perfectly fun.
Well, Hacks is good.
Yeah.
Hacks is good. I mean, the thing about this is that, honestly, Erica has got me reevaluating. Maybe I should go back to the show, because honestly, the first 2 episodes were really kind of hard to get through for me.
Of the studio.
Yeah, of the studio. And so her saying that to me lets me know, okay, I wasn't alone on that. and maybe I need to go back to it. And so if they could kind of figure out to not do what they did those first 2 episodes and kind of hit the ground running a little bit better, maybe it would be worth more seasons. I just need to watch the rest of it, I think.
Yeah, there's a sense of anxiety that is in every single episode. So I actually found sometimes I wouldn't watch it directly. I would be like doing something on the side and then have it on. And it's not because I didn't enjoy it, but I feel like I needed a sense of like not being too invested so that my heart rate got up every single episode. It got easier. There was an episode, I saw somebody on Reddit ranked it their least favorite episode, but I would say it was one of mine, which was the pediatric oncologist episode. I found that one to be incredibly funny.
I did too.
And kind of self-congratulatory about producers, right? And about being an artist. It was, anyway, in my opinion, one of the best episodes. I would be happy to watch more. I'm with you, Al. I think he is incredibly interesting. Seth Rogen is not somebody that I grew up with thinking like, oh, I can't wait for the next Seth Rogen film.
Yeah.
But he has somehow stuck it out in such an interesting way. And he's like putting his pottery out there. He's like been married to his wife for 14 years. They cared for her mother together. They like support each other. And now I'm getting into why I probably like the studio. Like, I like to see who these people kind of are. And I like what he's bringing to this show with both the absurdity of Hollywood and kind of almost like It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. You know that these are not the best people and they're going to do things that are wrong. And once you kind of accept that, I could enjoy and laugh at it a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
He's accepted the Apatow mantle well.
Yeah.
He wasn't necessarily, as a younger person, Pineapple Express or whatever, doing consistently stellar stuff up to that, but I feel like everything recently is
hey, Pineapple Express was okay.
It was okay, but it was not an Apatow level awesomeness.
No, but he found his niche and leveraged it into a really interesting career.
Yeah.
I don't know if he even has a niche. I think he and his producing partner, they have their hands in a lot of stuff.
Sure.
They produce together,
Yeah.
they direct, they write. I think their brand is really, I don't know, now we're talking about branding. Stop me. But they're kind of all over the place, which I think is really great.
Wasn't it those Halloween movies that Lawrence didn't like? Did they co-wrote? No, that was Danny McBride. Never mind.
Excuse me. Okay.
All right.
Don't misrepresent what I
I
said.
don't remember.
I like part 1 and part 2. I didn't like part 3. Don't misrepresent me. I don't like that. Come on, man. I can speak for myself.
All right. Any last words on this topic? Thanks so much, Erica, for coming back. We'd love to have you
Thanks,
anytime.
Erica. It's been fun.
It was so
Thank you.
great
Great
to
to
talk
speak
with
with
you.
Likewise, I had a really good time. Thank you, guys.
I will say real fast for anyone who wants to get in, because Mark talked about old Hollywood. There's a really good podcast called You Must Remember This that digs into old Hollywood stories and all the gossip and all the stories behind the stories. I would encourage anybody to listen to that. It's really, really good.
That's a good one. It's a really good one.
All right. So long, everybody.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
See ya.
Bye.
Pretty Much Pop is part of the Partially Examined Life Podcast Network. Get more Pretty Much Pop at prettymuchpop.com. Get bonus content for every episode at patreon.com/prettymuchpop.